Welcome again to our lecture series on new principles of economics, the science of markets. Today, we will discuss chapter 14, which focuses on markets in the global economy. We will explore how these markets drive the international division of labor and how they are regulated beyond the nation-state level.
So, we are doing international economics, right?
Yes and no. We recognize the special character of cross-border transactions and the need of an analytical framework that can incorporate such transactions. On the other hand, we offer an alternative to the traditional concept of international economics, which emphasizes the role of the nation-state and examines the global division of labor in terms of economic relations between countries only. This perspective primarily emerged in the 20th century, following the rise of nation-states in the 19th century and the outbreak of World War I. Notably, as a reaction against the strong forces of globalization that have been unfolding since the 1980s, we are currently witnessing a trend to re-emphasize the role of nation-states. For instance, security concerns are driving the revival of protectionism and national industrial policies. However, in a longer run historical perspective, markets have clearly unfolded and evolved beyond political borders.
A broad perspective of global history reveals the remarkable extent and impact of trade flows. For instance, the Roman Empire and the British Empire in the 19th century exemplify this phenomenon. Additionally, during the medieval Islamic period, long-distance traders connected Europe, the Middle East, India, and even China.
Our chapter introduces analytical tools that aid in understanding these complex processes. We adopt an institutional and evolutionary perspective, starting with a fresh approach to transactions. This approach distinguishes between the physical transfer of an economic good and the transfer of its institutional counterpart, such as a property right, along with the associated payment flows. The global economy is influenced by a complex array of borders that transactions must navigate, which can include political, cultural, linguistic, and monetary barriers, among others.
Our primary spatial unit is regions, which can exist both within countries and extend beyond their borders. These regions can scale hierarchically, such as Flanders in Europe, which is part of the Belgian national state, but also forms a Dutch language region together with parts of the Netherlands. On the next level, both Belgium and the Netherlands are members of the European Union, which in turn is located on the European continent, and so on.
Borders between regions lead to various costs for economic transactions, including transportation and communication expenses. Additionally, different currencies create specific costs, and currency areas may not always align with regional boundaries. Therefore, this chapter also examines the monetary aspects of the global economy, including foreign exchange markets.
With the rise of nation-states, distinct institutional forms for regulating the global economy emerged, exemplified by international organizations such as the IMF. In the context of international trade, we propose a general framework for understanding these forms as markets for market access rights. In this system, political units grant foreigners the right to trade and invest within their jurisdiction, while their domestic entities receive reciprocal access to foreign markets. This quid pro quo arrangement can stabilize patterns of market liberalization, similar to the GATT negotiations that took place after World War II. Likewise, we can analyze market access rights in the financial sector, which governs capital flows.
We will then present an evolutionary theory of endogenous comparative advantage, emphasizing the importance of trading capabilities. These trading capabilities are often embodied in the structures of multinational companies, which facilitate complex trade and investment patterns. This phenomenon has become particularly evident in recent decades, as globalization has been driven by the establishment of global supply chains.
The chapter concludes with a brief discussion of national payment balances, which are driven by the flow of economic transactions and the accompanying payments. Globalization mostly entailed the liberalization of capital accounts, making capital the primary driver of a country's external position.
Let us begin by understanding the basic analytical unit, the transaction. Every transaction involves two components: a tangible good or service, such as a bag of coffee being exported to another country, and an institutional counterpart, like property rights. We refer to these as the real object and the institutional object. These two components can be decoupled. For instance, one can trade institutional objects, such as coffee, on international commodity markets without physically transferring bags of coffee via that place. Additionally, coffee can be treated as an asset when trading coffee futures, further demonstrating this separation between the tangible good and its institutional counterpart.
Further complexity arises with the introduction of the concept of a TET, or transaction enabling transaction. This primarily refers to a service, such as the act of trading itself. Producers and traders are often different individuals. Traders possess specialized skills and knowledge that enable them to conduct transactions effectively.
Finally, we have the payment flow. Payments are often conducted across currency borders, which involves the exchange rate. In this case, exporters and importers need to agree on the currency in which the transaction is ultimately settled.
Our analysis is essential for understanding phenomena such as the global supply chains, which involve value-added trade, a critical driver of China's rise to the world's leading trading nation. In its simplest form, this represents a triangular flow of transactions in which a Chinese producer assembles a product using many intermediate goods imported from other countries, such as Japan, as illustrated in our diagram. China adds value, primarily through local labor, and the finished product is exported, for example, to the United States. In customs statistics, the product is counted at its full import price. However, in reality, the product serves as a vehicle through which Japan exports its intermediate goods to the United States. Notably, these goods include the institutional object of intellectual property, which encompasses the specialized knowledge required to manufacture these products and is not readily available in China.
By implication, bilateral current account statistics can be misleading. China may show a huge trade surplus with the US, but the value added by China would be small, and the largest share of US imports from China could be regarded as Japanese exports.
This demonstrates how economics can enlighten policymakers, who tend to be focused on bilateral national payment balances. In the case of the United States, value-added trade, such as smartphone components, patents, and brands, often means that the original exporter is even the US itself.
Global supply chains cross borders and often involve specific regions in certain countries, such as special economic zones in China during the first stage of its phenomenal economic growth.
Indeed, Within countries, specific regions often serve as the primary centers of export activity. For example, the German automotive industry is mainly concentrated in parts of southern Germany. These regions share the institutional framework of their country, except in cases such as special economic zones. Countries can also be part of larger institutional frameworks, most notably the European Union, which is not considered a nation state. Additionally, there are larger regions in Europe, such as the Baltics, that exhibit distinct economic dynamics. Mega-regional agreements, such as the Regional Economic Partnership, encompass multiple countries.
In most nation states, there's a convergence between jurisdiction and the currency area, meaning that the domain of a national currency, such as the Chinese renminbi or the Japanese yen, typically aligns with the boundaries of the nation. However, currency areas can extend beyond the nation state, with the European Union being a prime example, where some member countries do not use the common currency. Currency areas can also take on various institutional forms and scopes. For instance, a larger region may experience dollarization, which occurs when private agents primarily use a foreign currency for their transactions.
Borders create specific forms of trade costs. While transport costs are not solely determined by borders, they can define the physical boundaries of regions, such as mountain ranges. In the global economy, landlocked countries face particular disadvantages when compared to maritime nations. Technological innovations, such as the shipping container, can significantly promote globalization by drastically lowering transport costs over long distances.
National borders impose specific costs on transactions, including tariffs. While tariffs can be of similar levels across different borders, the expenses associated with customs procedures, such as waiting times, can vary significantly. In some cases, customs offices are plagued by corruption, which is often exacerbated by complex licensing requirements.
Borders separate various national regulatory regimes, which differ widely. These differences can include environmental standards, sanitary regulations, and professional certification. Such regulatory variations can create significant barriers to trade in services.
National borders do not always align with cultural boundaries, such as differences in language. For example, in Belgium, two distinct languages are spoken, leading to cultural and economic divisions between regions. On the other hand, larger areas may be characterized by traders who speak the same language.
Cultural borders are often more significant for investment than for trade, especially when complex negotiations must be concluded, which allows for much room for misunderstanding.
Global economic transactions frequently involve the exchange of currencies, which can lead to additional transaction costs. However, this can be mitigated through agreements, such as using the US dollar for oil trade. Still, if the currency used is not the domestic currency, there's a risk of exchange rate fluctuations occurring after a contract has been finalized.
Trade costs are lowered through the use of transaction-enabling transactions. For instance, container shipping is organized by specialized companies that provide export services to the producers. Additionally, intermediaries play a crucial role in global transactions. For example, ethnic trading networks connect various countries, conducting business within their own linguistic and cultural contexts.
The foreign exchange market is a vital component of the global economy. In this market, specialized traders buy and sell currencies, while other participants can acquire the currencies necessary for conducting transactions involving goods, services, and assets. This activity aligns with the distinction between the current account and the capital account in national payment balances, which we will explore in the final part of this lecture.
The global market for assets is particularly important because expectations regarding future exchange rate changes directly impact the expected yields of various investment instruments that are denominated in different currencies. For instance, it makes a significant difference whether a government issues bonds in its own currency or in a foreign currency. The foreign exchange needed to repay future debt and interest rates is obtained through the foreign exchange market. In this market, domestic exporters convert their receipts in foreign currency in domestic currency. Their profits are directly influenced by the exchange rate as it determines their price competitiveness in foreign markets.
The latter connection is explained by the concept of terms of trade. The exchange rate acts as a price with a direct macroeconomic impact since it influences all prices simultaneously. Therefore, we can compare a country's import prices with its export prices in the same currency to determine the value of imports that can be financed by the country's exports. The exchange rate also affects all other prices relative to other countries, meaning that bilateral actions can create externalities on other countries in terms of trade.
The exchange rate is greatly influenced by expectations about future changes to the rate, similar to the analysis of expected inflation and yields discussed in Chapter 12.
What determines those expectations?
One theory is related to the concept of purchasing power parity, exemplified by the popular Big Mac Index, published by the newspaper The Economist. Since a Big Mac consists of many ingredients typical of a consumption basket across various national economies, we can examine whether the price of a Big Mac remains the same when accounting for the exchange rate. The law of one price in arbitrage, which we introduced in Chapter 10, suggests that over time the prices of a Big Mac should converge. Of course, this assumes that most of its ingredients are traded globally. While this assumption might not always be realistic, for example with respect to locally grown ingredients, arbitrage can also play out indirectly via trade in inputs, for example in machinery that it used in supplying farms. Therefore, if the exchange rate reveals price differences, we might expect it to adjust towards a level that equalizes prices when converted to the same currency.
Purchasing power parity can anchor expectations about the exchange rate. But it is important to recognize that the exchange rate is heavily influenced by expectations regarding future changes to the rate, much like the analysis of expected inflation and yields that we have discussed in Chapter 12.
Alternatively, arbitrage also occurs in global capital markets, which helps define interest rate parities. Yields are determined by both expectations of the rate of return, expressed in one currency, and expectations of the future exchange rate, indicated in the currency of interest for the investor. For example, if someone buys bonds denominated in Japanese yen, but calculates their profit in euro, they will not only consider the yen interest rate, but also the expected yen-euro exchange rate. Together, these factors form the expectations for the yield.
It appears that the process of determining future exchange rates through transactions in the forex market is quite complex. When considering all influencing factors, reliable predictions of future developments become difficult. A full alignment of expectations based on a common understanding of current economic fundamentals is unrealistic due to the irreducible heterogeneity of economic actors that we have stressed in earlier chapters. Therefore, future exchange rates remain fundamentally indeterminate.
Let us now turn to the institutional regulation of the global economy. To keep the discussion straightforward, we will focus only on trade institutions for goods and services. These institutions partly emerge endogenously, such as the Lex Mercatoria or the private standardization initiatives. The other source is political. However, as long as there is no world government, these institutions develop through negotiations among countries. We approach this level as a market for market access rights, since every country claims the sovereign right to determine the conditions under which it opens its domestic market to foreign entities.
Why is this a market?
Countries, as represented by their political decision makers, often trade economic opportunities, which are typically calculated based on market size and profit potential. When a country voluntarily opens its market, it is generally assumed that the other country will reciprocate by opening its market as well. This pattern was evident in the negotiations over tariff reductions during the GATT rounds following World War II.
Such negotiations can result in an institutional framework similar to a constitutional level for national law, as there must be rules governing the negotiations themselves. An agreement such as the GATT represents a quasi-constitutional arrangement.
Yes, and this is even more salient in the case of the World Trade Organization.
So, do we also have a level of fundamental values that are enshrined in such a quasi-constitution?
Yes, this is often referred to as the liberal international economic order. For example, non-discrimination is such a fundamental regulatory principle.
However, this regulatory framework is often imposed on or forced upon other countries by a hegemonic power, similar to the practices of the British Empire. The World Trade Organization seeks to prevent such hegemonic actions by adhering to the one country, one vote principle and requiring consensus among its members. Unfortunately, recent WTO negotiations are stalled due to this high barrier, and we have observed increasing trade policy activity outside and against this framework, particularly by the administrations of US President Donald Trump.
Regulatory regimes can also be classified as formal or informal. For instance, voting rules in regional agreements may be officially based on the relative economic size of the member countries. Alternatively, there may be an informal consensus that certain positions are always assigned to nationals by specific countries.
The market for market access rights serves as the institutional mechanism for addressing the specialization dilemma, a concept that we have explored in Chapter 5 in Global Markets. According to standard economic theory, the unilateral opening of markets is considered superior to trade barriers in terms of enhancing national welfare, since gains from specialization can be exploited better. However, if exporting to other countries requires investing in country-specific trade-enabling transactions, this can lead to what is called a hold-up problem. Exporters may worry about the risk that market liberalization could later be revoked for domestic political reasons. If, in this context, a country only grants reciprocal market access to an importing country, it gains a tool for retaliation. The World Trade Organization oversees this reciprocal exchange and the procedures involved in retaliation.
The current regulatory system of international trade combines independent sanctions imposed by individual countries with a legitimization and oversight provided by a third party. As we mentioned above, some economists argue that this arrangement necessitates a hegemonic power to endorse and stabilize international institutions such as the United States in the case of the Bretton Woods institutions.
Yes, however, the emergence of regional trading agreements following the establishment of the WTO demonstrates that the market for market access rights is frequently intertwined with other political and cultural relationships, such as military alliances or shared colonial histories. These regional agreements often go beyond the multilateral arrangements, particularly in complex areas like trade in services.
Let us now explore the factors that influence international trade. Standard theory uses the principle of comparative advantage to explain how production is divided across countries. This concept is based on the fundamental idea of opportunity cost, which we discussed in Chapter 5. As illustrated in the diagram labeled A to D, this reasoning begins with the existing resources and skills each country possesses, which determine the internal price relationships. Subsequently, international arbitrage takes advantage of price differences between countries. Ultimately, this leads to an increase in global welfare.
This reasoning assumes that the sources of comparative advantage are known to the market actors.
Yes, traders just exploit this knowledge and overcome impediments to trade.
But if we start out from autarky, as the theory assumes, how can they know?
This is the crucial question, providing the rationale for our alternative evolutionary perspective, illustrated in the diagram with lowercase letters, A to G. Traders overcome obstacles to trade while dealing with uncertainty regarding the outcomes of their entrepreneurial actions. These actions generate information externalities, as discussed in Chapter 8, which attract new entrants and facilitate the diffusion of information about potential new market niches. Consequently, the production structure of the region or country adapts to this activity. At this point, traditional economic theory comes into play. However, comparative advantage is not fixed. It evolves endogenously.
This perspective highlights a phenomenon extensively studied in the field of new economic geography. It explains that within a country, certain regions develop clusters of exporting capabilities, often due to historical coincidences. Comparative advantage is path-dependent, meaning that there are typically no external factors that determine which region will become specialized. This also suggests that many industries are flexible and can relocate easily if market forces create a more attractive environment elsewhere.
However, once a location takes off, strong network externalities and complementarities create forces of increasing returns, causing locational advantages to become entrenched. A prime example of this is Silicon Valley. Specifically, the local labor market serves as an anchor, featuring a large pool of specialized workers who can easily move between companies, thereby facilitating strong knowledge spillovers. This pattern has been evident throughout history, such as in the German cluster of knife and sword production, medieval Solingen.
In the modern economy, multinational enterprises have emerged as powerful forces shaping the international division of labor. We view the M&E as a specific organizational form that arranges, combines, and targets cross-border transactions effectively. The key difference between M&Es and conventional trading practices is that M&Es can divide the production of a final product into multiple steps, which can occur in different locations. This creates a more fine-grained allocation of comparative advantage and the associated production processes. As a result, M&Es strive both foreign direct investment and trade, distinguishing them from mere portfolio investments across various countries.
MNEs can take various forms depending on the focus of their activities. Generally, we can distinguish between vertical and horizontal structures and their associated governance mechanisms. It is essential to recall that, similar to the general theory of evolving an endogenous comparative advantage, establishing such a structure is an entrepreneurial endeavor that involves uncertainty. Consequently, companies often experiment with different arrangements, adapting to the external economic and political environment. This was evident when global supply chains were disrupted by the COVID-19 pandemic.
In vertical structures, MNEs internalize the production chain, aiming to secure and control critical inputs from other countries. This leads to intra-firm trade, which is a significant aspect of international trade today. However, another dominant form that has emerged in recent decades is the development of complex global supply chains, where suppliers remain independent. In some cases, MNEs do not even have their own production sites. Instead, they focus on design, brand management, and research and development.
In horizontal structures, MNEs establish subsidiaries in various countries that utilize local resources and often focus on the domestic market. This approach serves as a substitute for exporting products from the home country. The MNE aims to exploit its specific advantages in firm-specific knowledge and skills, while also combining those advantages with locational benefits. In summary, the relationship between trade and investment is complex, but both generally move in the same direction, enhancing the international division of labor.
In concluding our exploration of the economics of global markets, let us briefly examine the macroeconomic aspects that are reflected in national payments balances. National payments balances define the rigid interdependencies between capital flows and trade in goods and services, specifically the capital account and the current account. Many economists believe that the capital account is the primary concern, as it is directly linked to the domestic balance of savings and investments. Failing to recognize this interdependence often leads to misjudgments by politicians and the general public.
Many people do not realize that a trade surplus indicates a country is exporting capital. For example, China's trade surplus means that it is sending capital to the rest of the world. This often surprises people, especially when considering that China simultaneously attracts the highest amount of foreign direct investment.
This apparent puzzle disappears when we apply strict principles of national accounting. China exports capital by accumulating large reserves of foreign exchange, primarily US dollars. The Chinese central bank invests these dollars into US Treasury bonds, effectively exporting capital. In the past, China was a major lender to the United States, which financed its excessive consumption, government spending, and trade deficits. Any trade deficit must be financed externally.
A current account deficit can only be sustained if the rest of the world views the importing country as an attractive place for investment. However, investing and trading are completely distinct activities. Therefore, the factors that sustain the deficit are mostly independent of the factors that drive the current account deficit.
As mentioned in the case of the United States, trade deficits often coincide with government deficits. In this situation, investors may view US bonds as a safe investment for reasons that are not directly related to global markets for goods and services.
The United States is a unique case because US dollar is the most important global reserve currency, allowing the US to borrow in its own currency. When we consider different currency areas, the interdependence of the capital account and the current account make current account adjustments complex and difficult to predict. One reason for this complexity is that if we focused solely on the current account, the exchange rate would normally serve as a natural adjustment mechanism. This would lead to a devaluation of a country's currency in the event of a trade deficit, as there would be excess demand for foreign currency. However, this mechanism can be countered by movements in the capital account.
As we saw previously, investment expectations and exchange rate expectations are not grounded in economic fundamentals that all market participants recognize. As a result, under the condition that the capital account is liberalized, countries may face sudden crises if capital markets change their perception of the domestic economy and withdraw capital. Suddenly, current account deficits become unsustainable and can only be corrected through a severe contraction of the domestic economy. This is another example where economic models, as enshrined in market expectations, can become performative.
Such phenomena have increased due to the liberalization of capital markets in the 1980s and 1990s. However, China did not follow this trend, and its external macroeconomic stability is largely attributed to its control over the capital account. As a result, even the International Monetary Fund has adjusted its evaluation of capital controls.
Let us now summarize our take-home lessons.
The chapter deconstructed global transactions analytically into the aspects of payment flows, transactions of real and institutional objects, and transaction-enabling transactions, TETs. Via TETs, the spatial structure of the global economy is endogenous in terms of the costs of overcoming distance and borders.
In the payments dimension, the exchange rate is a determinant of transactions, while also creating genuinely macroeconomic phenomena via affecting all prices across all transacting agents covered by the concept of terms of trade. The other key factor is the aggregate budget constraints of domestic agents vis-à-vis the rest of the world, the national balance of payments.
Global transactions unfold in a two-level regime, where the market level is shaped by the level of market access rights exchanged between the governments of jurisdictions. Exchange of market access rights contributes to overcoming the global specialization dilemma when jurisdictions maintain full sovereignty in controlling market access.
In the evolutionary view, comparative advantage is not given, but discovered and created by evolving transactions. This reflects uncertainty about spatially distributed economic conditions and spatially heterogeneous innovation. The global distribution of production is path-dependent, with a strong impact of the spatial distribution of capacities of producing TETs, specifically the M&E. In addition, there is the effect of spatially circumscribed externalities on locational advantages.
Despite the growing complexity of global transactions, the balance of payment remains a strict accounting constraint that drives emergent aggregate phenomena such as deficits and surpluses in trade. However, the globalization of financial markets results in a decoupling between financial flows and the financing of trade flows.
In the next lecture, we will delve into a highly contentious issue of great societal and political concern, namely the relationship between markets and inequality. We hope that you will join us again in this intellectual endeavor. See you there.
Thank you for being with us.